welcome Wednesday night Bible study to our online crowd and to our crowd here. Is this a crowd? Well, there's some people here. First things first, next Wednesday night, I am not able to be here. This is senior night for my daughter at Weatherford at the church. She graduates in May. Well, she gets to walk the stage in May. She actually has to do another semester to do her student teaching, but they're going to let her walk with her class. And Lexi has informed me that we need to be there for senior night, so I have to do what I'm told. That means you got two options. I can A, try to find me a replacement, or B, I can pre-record me teaching, but it wouldn't be very interactive. I've done that before when we were on vacation in Colorado. I've sent videos to be watched. I probably would think that y'all would prefer somebody with a pulse up here actually teaching class, but that might be dependent on the guys that, whether or not they'd be willing to take this. Don't feel like you'd have to do Daniel. As a matter of fact, I hate to bring it up, but this is the last easy chapter of Daniel. We're getting into chapter 7 next week, and you wouldn't have to do that if anybody wants to try to take a stab at teaching the class. Now, you guys look around. This is what we're talking about. This group here is who you'd be talking to. So any of you guys, I know some of you have taught before, if you can do this, and you can go on any topic you want. It doesn't matter to me. I'll make it up somehow with Daniel, whether we cover Daniel or not. Then let me know. But I do need to have probably someone in place. If by Sunday I don't have anybody, probably are going to be watching a video next Wednesday night. So I'll pre-record one. You also have in your packet tonight last week's lesson that I promised you because I didn't have it complete. It's just one page. It pretty much sums up what we were talking about with the handwriting on the wall. And now on page 12, we have session 6, Hanging Out with Daniel. Hanging Out with Daniel. Now, I had a title for, I think it was for chapter 1's lesson, What's for Dinner? And a working title for chapter 6 was, Who's for Dinner? But I changed it. Hanging Out with Daniel. This is, of course, by far the most familiar story in the book of Daniel, of Daniel's life, is when he is thrown into the lion's den. So let's get started here. We don't actually know how long Belshazzar has been reigning. His father has been gone for a while. And it does seem from the very point that Daniel made is that he should have learned from his father Nebuchadnezzar some of the things in his life. But it doesn't take long at all, does it, for the message that was written on the wall for that to come true. That night he's killed. And then Darius, the Mede, takes over at the age of 62. So when Belshazzar, after hearing what the handwriting on the wall meant, remember many meant your days are numbered, tekel meaning you've been put on the scale and been found lacking, you don't measure up, you don't weigh what you ought to, morally speaking. And the third one, Paris or Upharsin, whichever version of the Bible you have, your kingdom will be divided, and one will be given to the Medes and one to the Persians. Then he gives Daniel the purple robe and the gold chain for his neck, and third in charge, that third in command. Well, that probably meant Daniel's third in charge position was short-lived. As we start off looking then at Daniel chapter 6, the very next chapter, then we notice that Daniel does have a position. I wouldn't necessarily say it's third in charge, There are 120 satraps that Darius has appointed to be rulers over throughout the kingdom. And then there are 3 administrators over these satraps. And I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Satraps, satrap. Okay. And I didn't look that up, but there are 3 over them, and Daniel's one of those. And we do know that from the reading of this text, Daniel has distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities to stand out from the other 2 administrators. And it is the king's plan to put Daniel second in charge. So although the third in charge is short-lived, he does get very quickly here into the good graces of Darius to be considered to be second in charge. But what do the other administrators think about that? And the other satraps? They don't like it. And they're going to try to dethrone Daniel from the mindset or perception that Darius has of Daniel. But they've got a problem. What's the problem? They can't find anything wrong. There is no corruption to be found. I think we live in a time that we definitely can say, at least now, and probably has been this way for years, but it seems more prominent now than ever before, that if you put your name out there filing for a position for public office, there are probably people that are going to vet you out and try to dig up dirt. And what happens a lot of times is if they don't find the dirt, which kind of sad, most of the time they will. That may be a generalization, I'm sorry, but if you were looking for dirt on me, you'd probably find it, okay? Now, if you Google me, and I've done this, not because I'm vain or anything, I just am curious, what do people see out there? I would have liked to have seen excellent preacher, has longevity, or at least a pretty decent magician. You know what they see most of? Lenny officiated this funeral, then he did this funeral, then he did this funeral. It is in my mention on the internet is mostly connected to funerals I've done. That's kind of sad, isn't it? Well, yeah, but that's not on the internet much. I mean, yeah, something other than funerals. Get my name out there, okay? I don't want to be just associated with funerals all the time. Now, seriously, that you could probably find dirt on just about anybody, but they can't on Daniel. Now, of course, they don't have Google, and they don't have things that we have access to try to dig up dirt. But what does happen sometimes, if you don't find dirt, or if you don't find the dirt you're wanting, what will sometimes happen is what? Well, we got to make it up. Didn't they do that with Jesus? Yeah. They really tried to trap Jesus several times. The thing that they had to go with to try to make it stick in the minds of the Jews was he's guilty of blasphemy. That meant nothing to Romans. Nothing at all. Because to be honest, Jews thought Romans were blasphemers because they had their multiplicity of gods. They're the mythological gods. That meant nothing to Romans, but what they did have to come up with, although they are bent on blaspheming, they had to present it to the Romans as a threat to the peace of this area. And Pilate knew that it was his job at stake if he doesn't appease Caesar, giving him the confidence that I can maintain peace in this area I'm at. That's why Pilate looked for an out, because he really found nothing wrong with that man. Plus the fact that his wife had been warned in a dream. Remember that? And it's indicative as to why he would wash his hands and say, I'm innocent of this man's blood. But he knew that the riot was about to happen. When he tried to release Barabbas, to release Jesus, They call for releasing Barabbas. What do I do with Jesus? Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And he couldn't stop that. So it's more of a diplomacy thing to keep the peace and job security thing for Pilate than it is for the blasphemy charge. But for the Jews, they had to go with blasphemy. Question: did Jesus blaspheme? No. Now, by the definition, that's claiming to be God when you're not. Did Jesus ever claim to be God? Yeah. But he was. He was. I was talking to a friend. As a matter of fact, it's Emily Crow. If she's watching tonight, well, she's not because she's at her church in Collinsville. Our youth minister we had before, Jordan Crow, his wife Emily had some Jehovah's Witnesses come by and visit, and she's inviting them in and had a study with them. And of course, one of the things, if you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, is they have their own translation of the Bible called the New World Translation, put out by the Watchtower publication. How many of you have seen this or know about this? And one of the major things in their translation that they will try to convey is that, first of all, Jesus was not crucified, he was impaled. They'll identify him as Son of God, but they won't identify him as Son of God as being God, deity-wise. And they claim Jesus is a created being. They use the phrase in Colossians 1, verse 15, where Paul's writing that Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, claiming that, see, there's proof that he was created. So therefore, John 1, verse 1, in our Bibles and in the Greek, states this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there's no definite article or indefinite article there, but they, in their New World Translation, insert one, an indefinite article. And what does that mean? It means, there says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Like seen as a ruler, but not as deity. Small letter G, God. And so, where was I going with this? Seemed like I had a point with this one. Right. So that's right. So there is a way in which Jehovah's Witnesses, although I've never heard anybody from that camp use the blasphemy word to other Christians who claim Jesus as God, but that is basically what they do think, is that Jesus is not God. And when you go and show them verses like, and I'm kind of getting sidetracked, so I'll try to quit chasing this rabbit in a second, but you go to verses to show them like, well, didn't Jesus pray in John 17 that I and the Father are one? They'll be quick to point out, to say, but he also prayed that you and I be one with them as he and the Father are one. Well, I'm not God, and you're not God. So it's a pretty good point they make there. So you have to use some other construct. We used to have a verse. I say we used to have a verse. It's still in the King James. The verse 1 John 5:7 that talks about the three that are supposedly in the Godhead. But the fact of the matter is that is not an accurate translation of that particular verse. In the Greek, it doesn't say that. In our Bibles today, there are three that bear witness, but it doesn't name the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Where you do find in Scripture in Greek where you have those three together is in the Great Commission, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You've got John 1:1. In the passage that they would look at in Colossians 1:15, saying he's the firstborn over all creation, if you were to read verses 16 and 17, you'd find out that the creation is by him, through him, and for him. He is not a product of the creation. He is the originator of it. And in case you didn't know this, and I think that y'all probably do, because I'm looking at a lot of Bible students here, but if you'll remember in the narrative of the creation scene in Genesis 1, What God said on day 6 is, let us make man in our image, and that's a plural personal pronoun. Who's he talking to? It's not Adam and Eve. He hadn't created them yet. He's about to. He's speaking to the other persons of the Godhead. And then I would throw in supporting evidence here, Hebrews 1:3, that says the Son is the glory of God, the exact representation of his being. Therefore, there is a transcending level of the oneness that Jesus has with God compared to us. That makes sense? And if you then look back in Genesis 1, you've got all those three present. The Spirit hovering over the face of the water. In the beginning, God. Now, and by the way, the word for God there is Elohim, and although this can be misleading, it really doesn't make a good solid point. It's interesting to note Elohim is plural. It's plural in nature as a word. And you have God, you have the Spirit, and you have spoken word. How did God create? Let there be light. What does John 1 say Jesus is? The Word. The Word. There's the word there. God said, God said, God said, God said. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos. And of course, John 1:14, the Word became flesh. I lied. I'll throw in one more passage. Philippians 2 speaks of the fact that Jesus left his equality with God. Now, how could you leave your equality with God if it never existed? I'm using logic there. He did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he left it behind and became the image of a man who would live and suffer, even dying a death on a cross. And of course, when he did that, then God's going to elevate him to have the name above all names, and that every tongue confess, every knee bow. So you use a construct to get to the God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. It is true Trinity is not in the Bible as far as a word, but the concept's really there. Okay, you had a hand up, and I kind of rough-shot it over you, Denver. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask or add to that? Okay, that's all right. I didn't intend to even go this way tonight, but I thought, well, it's interesting because this just came up in a conversation.
What is so impressive to me is he is the very essence of God. It's as if, by the way, this is the only part of me you're going to see.
Yes. And there's a ton other verses. And the three are one. And the ton other verses, you can actually use the New World Translation and show them with their own Bible what is said of Jehovah in the Old is referred to what Jesus would refer to himself as in the New. Cornerstone, the rock, the I am. These are other passages that are also supporting evidence. When Jesus says, I am the I am, that's a claim to be what? Deity. That is the sacred name of God. And Jehovah's Witnesses hate this, but you turn and you show them not Ecclesiastes, Isaiah 9 verse 6. Wonderful Counselor, mighty God, Prince of Peace, Eternal Father is in that mix. Everlasting Father or Eternal Father. You can show in their own translation. Their translation's interesting. They claim that many scholars, maybe 40 or so, are involved in their translating, and that they translated from the original languages, going back further even than the antiquated documents that we have our versions from today. But for sake of humility, they've all remained anonymous. That's right. All right. I do think it's productive. But how you handle it is you know, it is productive. Melba, I wish she was here, but Melba came from Jehovah's Witnesses. They can be converted. There's a book in our library. I don't know if anybody's ever read this book, Why I Left. And it's a culmination of several stories from people who walked out of their particular denomination. And there's a chapter on why I left Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think that's it's can be productive. But I say, come on, bring it. I love it. I love it. And I give Emily kudos for even trying to talk with him, you know, just her bravery. Okay, we are needing to come back to Daniel. Okay, nothing wrong with Daniel, but they try to find something. And the only thing they know they can do is try to find something that has to do with God, with Daniel and his God. That's where we're going to be able to find something. And so what they do is they go to Darius and say, hey, king, wouldn't it be a great idea that for the next 30 days that anybody who prays at all only prays to you? Wouldn't that be great? Well, Darius is thinking, sure, that sounds great. Let's do it. And he does it. There's a little key component or feature that they know about that's going to lock this in. And it's this very fact that the laws of Medes and Persians could not be what? Repealed. And they're playing that card, aren't they? Darius has not considered, this is me thinking this, but I think the text bears this out, hasn't even considered that this is going to affect Daniel, my most trusted guy that I'm fixed to put in second in command. Daniel hears about this, and I know I've strayed from the outline a lot here. Let's read chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. Let's do that, because I have that underlined here in our text. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, which is two of the three, right? Prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed, this is a lie because Daniel's not in this mix, that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. I saw this many times on TV shows and maybe even in movies where, okay, the governor has to sign a bunch of things and you're just having this person shove papers over and he's signing. What am I signing? I don't know. Radar would do this with Colonel Potter or with, who was the other on MASH? Not Colonel Potter, but the one before him. But anyway, you know, Radar would just kind of scratch his head. Oh, well, you know, it's for this or that. And you already agreed to this, and he signs and doesn't realize. I think this is happening with Darius, don't you all? It's kind of flying under the radar. I mean, he knows what he's signing, but he's not been told the whole truth. But it sounds good. Let's do it. Any questions so far? I'm going to go on to this bullet that says, Daniel, this is about halfway down, Daniel learned about this law, but it didn't stop him from doing what he was in the habit of doing already, which is praying upstairs in his home with the windows open toward Jerusalem. And he did this how many times? 3 times a day, down on his knees. I think if the windows are open, he's on his knees, he's praying looking out toward Jerusalem, you'll see him when you walk by. And somehow I think these prefects, satraps, administrators, they knew that's how we'll get our evidence. We'll know that he's doing this. That's how they fabricated this thing that we're going to get Darius to sign. He learns about it. What's he do? Well, he goes to his house. And he's going to pray, but he ain't going to open the windows, right? No, he does open his windows. Nothing changes in what he's in the habit of doing. He opens his windows, and he's still doing this 3 times a day on his knees, visible to all. He doesn't alter his practice. Well, the satraps administrators, I'm sure it didn't take very long at all to go tell on him in front of Darius. And Darius is kind of caught in this quandary. Didn't you sign this edict? Yes, I did. And yeah, whoever disobeys, throw him in the lion's den. Well, Daniel is praying to his God, someone other than you. And what do you think is going through Darius's mind here? Didn't think that one through. And I'd also be thinking in my mind, maybe, I thought y'all told me all the administrators approved this, were recommending this. Where was that administrator, you know? So he's caught in this quandary, and he reminds himself, but he's quickly reminded by the others too, that you can't change, you can't back down. That Mede and Persian law cannot be repealed. Says you're right. Take Daniel to the lion's den. But this is interesting. He goes and encourages Daniel. Look at verse 16 after he's being thrown in. May your God whom you serve continually save you or rescue you. What's that tell you about Darius? Yeah. And he has some hope, doesn't he? I really like this idea that Darius, although he has to stay true to his word, I'm sure he regretted it, but he still thinks, well, this might still work. Go ahead, Sam. Mm-hmm. Yes. So they recognize, and sometimes they'll say, may your God rescue you, whom Daniel claims to be the only God. But then there'll be the times where Nebuchadnezzar will say, may we all glorify or give glory to this God. And sometimes it's like they put themselves in, and this is our God. And yet sometimes I'll back away and, yeah, somebody had a hand up. Go ahead, Denver. Yes.
These are accoutrements of a realm, of a kingdom. You have to have an array of gods for the people to look up to.
Yeah.
But Daniel has this one God, and he is obviously different because Daniel is different.
And you have to think there's a segue of Daniel's reputation that's being linked from Belshazzar and maybe even as far back as Nebuchadnezzar that Darius is aware of. How could you just start off with, I'm going to have you as one of the 3 big guys? He gets passed off in this baton being passed as, well, he's going to be 3rd in charge, and I'm going to take him on as my trusted person. Yes. Yes. And, what if I had been Darius? I might would have gone to the den and said, Daniel, I am so sorry. This is not what I intended at all. It's out of my hands now. There's nothing I can do about it. And I might have gone home and been without sleep, but there's a very strong possibility that I would have had no hope for anything. But he has hope because it's early the next morning. He goes to see how Daniel's doing. That speaks something of Darius. Yes. And this this brings up an thing that even I think can correlate today. How sometimes people who are not followers of God have more faith in God than the followers of God have. Wow. You know? That's pretty indicting to me. I mean, I'm just talking about me. That there are people who actually, what was that old story about, I better not start that story because I'm afraid I won't know how it goes in the end. I'm going to go ahead and attempt it anyway. I think it was a guy who wanted to open up a liquor store or something like that, and he was trying to go before the judge and the planning committee and the zoning law saying he could do this, but the religious guy's trying to not let him do this. And what the guy was wanting, I know I'm messing this up, but you'll get the point. The guy was saying to the judge, I want him to quit praying about it. Let's see, is that right? Anyway, the punchline is this. The judge said, sounds like you've got more faith in that guy's prayer than you do. It's kind of a story like it's showing the outsiders have oh man, when they get their God involved, nothing can stop them. Kind of like what Gamaliel says in Acts chapter 5 about if this thing or work be of God, you can't stop it, right? If you're going to fight against it, you'll be fighting against God. So what's going to happen? Okay, so pretty good point there. He's thrown in the lion's den. The king encourages him. After he's thrown into the den, it says in verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring. I hate to do this, but I got to, you know. And with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. I bet anybody that broke that seal probably would die. That's probably a penalty there. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den, and when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. Now, it says when he came near the den, he's not there yet, but on the way, Daniel, Daniel, are you still in there? Are you okay? I love that about Darius. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And what was Daniel's response? I'm here. We're doing okay. We're playing paper, rock, scissors, you know, whatever it is. I'm sorry, I added that. That's not in the original Greek. We're playing duck, duck, goose, right? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. And the king is overjoyed by that. And he gave the order to pull Daniel out, and then he ordered all those accusers. And here's what I hadn't realized. I know I've read this before. Along with their wives and their children are thrown into the den. And it says before any of them hit the floor, the lions were devouring them. And what was on the floor, the bones left, the lions are crushing the bones on the floor of the den. Is that all the 120 satraps and the 2 other administrators and their families? Or is it just the small portion of those who came in? And, you know, I have to think it's probably those that were the most influential in getting the king to sign off on this. But wow, what a consequence. And then Daniel is I'm sorry, I have it as Daniel made the following decree. Darius makes the following decree. Sorry about that. In verses 25 through 27. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And by the way, this is written in every known language so that everybody in the world could see this. And then Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius as well as in the reign of Cyrus, the Persian. Okay, feedback. Any questions right off the top of your heads or additional comments or things I might have missed? Okay, let's go through our questions then. What problems can you foresee with 120 rulers over the kingdom? This was problem number one that just stuck out like a sore thumb. Because never have we up to this point seen this many people in charge in this way. Now, obviously, if you're going to do that, the three administrators is a good idea, isn't it? That really is a good idea. But you ever worked in a place where you had too many bosses? Right. That's the only way it could work. Yeah. It does kind of imply, does it not, the magnitude of the size of the kingdom. This is not some mom and pop operation. This is more like Amazon or Google based. This is a big corporate thing. This government correlates to that size. So it's probably not as overwhelming as I'm reading it, but I'm just saying, wow, that's a lot of people. But you remember, go ahead.
But he had the intelligence to follow God's lead when he eliminated several layers of
Yeah.
management.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and ask let's ask the question that's like the elephant in the room right now. Why the wives and the children?
Why did God tell Saul to kill the entire village?
Yeah. From a strategic standpoint, you're yeah. I know it sounds like condemnation by association. And I'd like to think that God does not operate that way today. Just because you knew somebody who did bad or you're related to somebody who does bad. I know that we have in Ezekiel, I think it is, that the son is not guilty of the sins of the father, nor is the father guilty of the sins of the son. I don't believe inheriting Adam's sin passed on, to us. But I also recognize from a strategic point of view, if you don't stamp that out, you'll have kids that will rise up that are resentful and be a threat to the peace of your kingdom in the future. And it kind of stems back to the very command God gave to Israel to begin with when you go and enter Canaan, drive them all out. Because you've got to get rid of the influence that's going to draw you away. And when they were unsuccessful or maybe unwilling at times to do that, that is what happened. So it sounds harsh, sounds cruel. This was the king's doing, but it has a strategic thing there. Question 2, what value is there in living beyond reproach as Daniel did? I couldn't help but think of that phrase because it's connected to elders, in 1 Timothy 3. Above reproach or beyond reproach. And we often think about, especially when it's time to think about maybe installing new leaders, we'll come back to these lessons and we'll talk about them and go through 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1. And I always have to deal with, because if I don't, it's going to get asked, what's it mean to be above reproach or beyond reproach? And so, since we have an elder in the room, I'm going to defer to him and let him answer this question. See what I did there? Now, if he had gotten really mad and threw a fit of rage and left stomping his feet, then we would say, maybe that wasn't a good example. I should have called on one of the other elders. But do you think it means perfect? Are you perfect? Good answer. Then I would say we better ask his wife, who would probably tell us what. You know? There ain't nobody here perfect. And I know ain't a word, but I use it still. Okay? Ain't nobody perfect. Just remember that. Remember that when he messes up and give him some leniency, okay? I'm trying to help you out. Show favor and grace and mercy to each other. And you always say, I'm sorry, you're right, and I'm wrong. That helps with the marriage, okay? No one's perfect. Barbara comes close. But above reproach does mean something about Gail's moral character. I've never heard a bad thing about Gail more than once. I've never heard a bad thing about Gail. I've never even heard if Gail even ever been pulled over for speeding. Have you? Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to know. He already knows I can read his mind because I divined a PIN code from him earlier in the year. But no, I'm just teasing. But these guys are not perfect, and deacons aren't perfect. They're definitely not perfect. I love Charles Hodge's book. Charles Hodge wrote 3 books about preachers, elders, and deacons. In his opening chapter on deacon, we don't have any deacons here. You served as a deacon, didn't you? I love this opening line. And Charles Hodge, have you all heard of Charles Hodge? Charles B. Hodge grew up on the river of, on the Onion Bank, what was it called? He had a name of that creek. Well, anyway, it doesn't make a difference, but he has a lot of folk story. Why is Jacob running like that to his house? That's weird. Anyway. He wrote in the opening chapter that he thought Paul's thorn in the flesh was a deacon. I love that. I don't know. Did somebody come to mind just then, Gail? I don't know. We got good elders. We got good deacons. Where was I going with all that? I lost my squirrel. But beyond reproach. When Daniel, they can't find any corruption in him. You know, this is probably above any of us in our perfection scale. How close to perfection we are. Daniel seems to be way above me on that, you know. I've got a record. I mean, there's a traffic record, you know. We have things that follow us, our transcripts from college, our credit reports, our traffic records. Insurance companies know about that. Our medical histories follow us no matter where we are. You change insurance companies, they just going to take you as you are? No. There's a record that follows you. And for him to have this kind of thing where they have to, out of necessity, make something up, speaks well of Daniel. So my question then was, what value is there in living beyond reproach? Well, you will impress some people around you as he did Darius. When Darius is fixing to put him second in command, it's because of his exceptional qualities. What else? Yeah. Whatever the disconnect was between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, that didn't exist between Belshazzar and Darius. That's true. Because Belshazzar doesn't seem to know who Daniel is. But yeah, you're right. He comes with it's like a baseball player's card. Here's some stats for you. It kind of highlights and bullets things that are key characteristics. What would the dangers be? Or how do I word it? What dangers are there in living beyond reproach? So let me ask our solo elder here tonight another question. Have you found that you can please everybody? Okay. And have you ever remembered a time, and maybe actually, that everything the elders decided, everything the elders ever did pleased everybody in the church?
No, I can remember a time that I didn't need to please all the elders.
But besides hiring me, I think what we know is the answer is obviously not. I can't please everybody, and you can't, and others can't. Yes, that's true. There are always those who, Avon Malone was one of those leaders I got blessed to have for prison epistles at Oklahoma Christian before he passed away. How many of you remember Avon Malone? Avon Malone would always talk about every church has their brother cantankerous and their sister sandpaper. And I guarantee you, every church I've ever been a part of, and I realize why I'm saying this now, that you're going to wonder who it is here, but I guarantee you there was those that existed in every church I've been in. I should go ahead and say right now they've gone ahead and died. That way that clears me. Which is, I'm not going to speak anymore about that. I love everybody, by the way, even my enemies, because Jesus said to, right? Question 4. What does a government intend to accomplish by having a rule about laws that can't be repealed? I don't know. This is probably not that relevant of a question, but we still have 11 minutes. So what do you think? I mean, is that a good way to operate? It's kind of like saying from here on out, we'll always treat this particular disease with this particular drug. Well, science is going to come along and show something either. How many of you have seen this? There's actually a kind of a funny commercial that comes across YouTube sometimes. I haven't seen it in a while. How many of you have heard that eggs were bad for you? And then they changed their mind and said, no, we were wrong on that. And then they changed their mind and said, something about eggs is bad for you. And they'll come along and say what? We were wrong about that. Hey. Yeah, what? Well, yeah. So, we all know that things can change, and that's such a trivial thing, but why have a law where, once you say something, that's the policy from here on out? It probably is, but I think the pitfall to that is it's a way to entrap your king, too. It's a way to have some leverage. Maybe in their way of thinking, this is our method of checks and balances, Oh, so if you're going to do that, then that means you've set the precedent for this, and you can't go back on that, You can't change your mind. I'm not stating we have a perfect government, but I am grateful we can have amendments. And, the Bill of Rights starts us off the right way, I think, and then we have that ability to amend. Now, sometimes I don't like that, too, when it doesn't go the way I want to. It gets amended maybe the way I didn't expect. But I do like the idea that we have a kind of fluidity of some of these of our laws so it can continue to improve as we learn, if that makes any sense. A government needs to be able to evolve to some degree. Number 5, this is a more important question. What can we learn from Daniel's prayer habits? Yes. Of course, this is not a mandate, and certainly not anything I can see in the New Testament for sure, where we ought to always pray 3 times a day. What we actually have in the New Testament is to pray continually, or pray without ceasing. To be in the habit of prayer, I think, is the point. And Daniel was in the habit of prayer. Just out of curiosity, does it really matter where you pray? Can you pray out in public? Can you pray in the privacy of your home? Jesus said your closet, right? Now, did he mandate that you ought to be a closet prayer? No. He's talking about the ones who have the wrong intention with their prayer life to just be seen by people. It's not a legalistic thing where, oh, I've got to find a closet because we don't have enough closet space in this building, and all of my closets at the house are crowded already. It's the fact that it's the proper frame of mind, but you have it in a habit. And I love the fact that he doesn't change. You know what? He could very well have gone home and not opened the windows for the next month and been okay with God as far as I can see. He could have been okay with God. Go ahead, Sam.
That would have damaged his people he was going to love and approach.
Yeah.
He was showing them that no matter what, I'm going to honor my God.
Yeah. When I say it would have been okay with God, let me rephrase that, because God probably doesn't care whether your windows were open and if you were facing Jerusalem or not. I don't see a mandate there. But I think it's a neat thing that he's doing this, and for him to have changed would have caught the attention of God, thinking, well, what are you doing here? Are you now ashamed? Do you not want to be caught? Do you, and that's where the problem would have been with the conscience of Daniel. And he probably knew that. He probably thought, well, I won't even, that may be the option. Others might do that, but I'm not going to change. I'm not ashamed of my God. No matter what happens, God's going to be with me. And that speaks volumes of his faith. All right. What can we learn from Daniel whenever faced with government versus faith? Now, we have some verses, don't we, that tells us as Christians to honor certain governmental things, structures and things. Pray for the king, right? We can pray for our nation. Romans 13 certainly tells us that we ought to pay our taxes and support our government in the power that God gave it, because God's the one that establishes the government. But that's not a blank check, is it? There is an implied lesson when you take all of Scripture that, okay, now, when government says quit doing something that you know God says do, then you've got to pick and choose who you're going to follow. And there's where we come with the response that I think Peter has when they tell him and John to quit preaching Jesus in the streets of Jerusalem. And Peter says we ought to obey God rather than men. And that's not like we'll never obey man and your laws from here on out. It's when it comes to this, we're going to do the God side. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. When you say the word choice, I love that word, and it reminds me of Joshua. Choose this day whom you're going to serve, whether the gods of Ammon or whoever he mentions there. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. I love that. It's standing up, making that declaration. Here's what we're going to do. It's conviction. Love that. I don't know if we do enough of that today. I don't think we ought to be going out there all praying out in the open so we can be seen. Look at us, we're praying people. But we shouldn't be ashamed of showing our faith. How many of you, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty if you don't, but how many of you go to a restaurant and you frequently pray for the meal when there are other people in their dining hall? We've done this all of our life. And I can't remember a specific example when it was our family maybe, but I know there are times whether we were with family or I was with a church group or the youth group on a trip where we prayed and somebody approached me afterwards and said, thank you for that. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever thought about your prayer life being evangelistic like that? Whether it draws attention and just, hey, that's good, that's a cool thing, and that makes me interested in doing that. Or it just says, I'm grateful we're not the only ones that pray for our meal. They prayed for theirs, see? And it encourages you when you see others do that too.
That's a good feeling, because a lot of times, when we were out in the middle of nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
and we stopped and prayed, and the waitress backed up. I didn't see her, but she didn't move. She thanked us for that. I mean, it encouraged her.
Yeah.
It encouraged us.
And I'm not truly a mind reader, okay? I do tend to think I've got a little giftedness in kind of reading people to some degree. Sometimes you can be in public and sense something's not right with your waiter or waitress or someone you're sitting next to might be having a bad day. And there's not this message of God saying, go talk to her. But there's a little nudge in me that sometimes, and I won't do this with everybody, but I feel like if there's an open door, I ought to walk through it. I have been known to pray for a waitress. I might tip her or him, and I'm a good tipper. I will brag on myself with that. My wife will tell you I tip well. Would you agree with that, Landon? Huh? Because he's getting his calculator out and saying, well, Dad, you know, whatever percentage he wants to use there is really just this. I don't care if it's good, and I'll even tip if it's bad service. I just do, but I don't tip maybe in excess. I shouldn't be bragging. But what I have found about this is a waitress might say, thank you, I appreciate that because this has been a tough month. Guess what you've got an invitation to do right then and there? Can we pray with you before we leave? How many of you ever offered prayer to somebody and they turned you down? No, I'd rather you not. It's rare if it happens. Now, a lot of people turning down, well, you have a Bible study with me. Would you like to come to our church? Well, we'll get no's all the time. But you'll be more often than not have people agree to have you pray with them. I've even had atheists who have welcomed me praying for maybe a medical procedure coming up. An atheist, by the way, that I have in mind is no longer now an atheist. He's not a member of the church yet, but he is attending a church with a lady that grew up in church. And there's several in this church that know who I'm talking about. Y'all probably wouldn't know who this is. But that is an interesting thing, that if you keep an open, never burn a bridge, keep that open. Keep the doors open all the time. Even if they flat out reject you, just say, well, thank you for your time, and just remember that the offer's still there, if you ever want to. Okay, now we are out of time. Go ahead, Sam. Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't want to hijack you, and if you're not done, I want you to get back on this, but let me say something here. A lot of times, a Christian will jump in there saying that's an opportunity, maybe with this waitress. But then they'll say like the most, okay, let me just ask you how you feel about this. Well, you should just suck it up and know God's in control. That's sometimes the worst thing you can do. Or here's a couple Bible verses. Like, swallow these pills, you'll feel better in the morning. Not trying to downplay Bible verses, but there's something about the parable of the soil maybe the soil's not cultivated enough for the Word, which is a seed yet. Cultivate the soil first. And that's how Jesus did things. He didn't just shove Bible verses out. He treated the need first by showing the compassion for that person. And that's where we got to be human. And I want to get to Bible verses later, but maybe that's the worst thing you could do right there. Is it'll be okay, God will work it out. To somebody that just lost their spouse, you think that's really going to work right then and there? You can't assume that. Maybe it is, but you can't assume that. You just need to be probably the person that doesn't say a word. But I'm here for you. My presence. And listening if you need to talk.
That may be the closest they ever get to the Bible.
Yeah.
Just watching your actions or no action. The look of your face.
Yeah. And there's people that are gifted on doing the right thing. And I'm not trying to be critical of people that do the wrong thing. I'm just saying maybe that's not your giftedness, and that's why maybe in Romans 12, for those who have the gift of mercy, let them be merciful. And the other giftedness, maybe that's your area, maybe that's not your area. As a matter of fact, Paul says not everyone should, when you restore someone who's fallen in sin, go to him, but only if you're spiritual, and restore them gently. And I have some people that I'll say, hey, so-and-so's caught up in a sin. There's some people, I'm not going to say in this church, but there's some people I know, have known, that would be the wrong people to go. Because they'll go and tell them ultimatum, well, you better start this or you're going to go to hell. That's the last person I want to send to that guy or to that girl, you see. I wanted that question 8. Just look at that real quick. Describe this scene of being that night. We know what Darius is doing. He's not being entertained. He's staying up. He's worried. What's Daniel doing? He says the angel has come to shut the mouths of these lions. I got to ask, did they nudge you with their nose and get a good sniff? They still have their claws. Purring? Yeah. I mean, this is not a Christian scene at all. This is not a Christian scene I'm painting in my mind at all, but I think it is funny that they're sitting around playing cards, smoking cigarettes. I mean, is that what they're doing? They're not doing that. Yeah, and they're just kind of dumbfounded and thinking, well, we can, whatever. And nice kitty. Imagine the smell, the temperature, the noises. Imagine that scene, and there's confidence because God's in control. God never promises, this is the conclusion, God never promises that you'll never have danger or be thrown into the den of lions. But His presence is there, and that was in the fiery furnace too. Always choose God over government wherever they're at odds. And do not be intimidated to express your faith openly in front of the world. This don't show off. Don't do it arrogantly. All right, we'll decide soon about what's going to happen next week, but the next chapter is chapter 7. And we get very apocalyptic there, so I'll start on that lesson. Have a great week. We'll see you Sunday morning, Lord willing. It's a beautiful day outside still.